What happens when prejudice collides with power in the most exclusive of settings? This isn't just a story about being judged by the color of your skin. It's about a brilliant black CEO, a woman who built an empire from scratch, being told she doesn't belong in a first-class airport lounge. They tried to humiliate her to kick her out like a common trespasser, but they made one catastrophic mistake. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and they were about to learn that the highest levels of access aren't just bought, they're earned. Stick around for a story of shocking audacity and epic, life-altering karma. The Ethelgard Premier Lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was an oasis of curated tranquility. It was a space designed to insulate its patrons from the mundane chaos of travel, a hushed sanctuary of muted earth tones, supple leather armchairs, and the gentle clinking of crystal on polished mahogany. The air itself seemed different, filtered and scented with a subtle, expensive blend of sandalwood and bergamot. Here time slowed, and the titans of industry legacy heirs and world-famous artists could breathe a sigh of collective relief before being whisked away to their next global destination. Dr. Serafina James sat in a secluded corner, a buttery soft cashmere shawl and a deep shade of charcoal draped over her shoulders. To the casual observer, she might have seemed out of place. She wasn't in a power suit or couture. She was dressed for the grueling 14-hour flight to Seoul ahead of her in tailored black athleisure wear from a niche designer and a pair of simple, elegant Golden Goose sneakers. Her hair was styled in intricate box braids adorned with a few delicate silver cuffs that caught the soft light. Her focus was entirely on the tablet propped against a glass of still water, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was on a muted video call, listening more than speaking. On the screen was David Chen, her CFO, his face a mask of concern. The revised offer from Omnicorp just came through. David was saying, his voice a low murmur from the tablet speaker. They're raising their bid by another $800 million, but they're insisting on a controlling 51% stake. It's aggressive, Sarah. Serafina took a slow sip of water. It's not aggressive, David. It's desperate. They know our Q3 projections are going to blow past every analyst's forecast. They're trying to buy the house before the world finds out it's sitting on a gold mine. She looked up, her gaze sweeping the lounge for a moment. Her company, Origin Innovations, was her life's work. It was at the bleeding edge of neural interface technology, developing prosthetics that could be controlled by thought alone. The technology was revolutionary, and the acquisition talks were in the tens of billions. This trip to Seoul was to meet with their primary chip fabricator, a final piece of the puzzle before their next major product launch. Her gaze momentarily fell upon a woman seated a few armchairs away. The woman, probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a string of pearls that seemed just a little too tight, was staring at her. It wasn't a curious glance. It was a look of pointed disapproval, an appraisal that took in Serafina's relaxed attire, her braids and her race, and found them all wanting. The woman, who clutched her Louis Vuitton handbag like a shield, then caught the eye of a passing lounge attendant and beckoned him over with an imperious flick of her wrist. Serafina had seen that look 1,000 times. It was the look she got when she test drove a high-end sports car. The look she got when she walked into a Michelin-starred restaurant without a reservation. It was a look that said, "You do not belong here." Years ago, it would have stung. Now it was just tiresome. She turned her attention back to her call, dismissing the woman as an irrelevant flicker of static. "Forget Omnicorp's offer for a moment," Serafina said, her voice calm and steady. "What's the feedback from the clinical trials at Johns Hopkins?" "Flawless," David said, a rare smile breaking through his serious demeanor. "The sensory feedback integration is testing at 99.7% efficiency. We have a veteran, a sergeant, who lost his arm in Kandahar, who was able to tie his daughter's shoelaces last week. He wept, Sarah. The review board is calling it a miracle." A genuine warm smile touched Serafina's lips. That was why she endured the corporate battles, the endless flights, the casual bigotry of women with pearl necklaces. For moments like that. "That's what matters," she whispered. "Send a gift basket to the sergeant's family. Something extravagant. And David, prepare our counter. We're not selling controlling interest. We're offering a strategic partnership. Draft it up." As she was about to continue, a shadow fell over her table. She looked up to see a man in a sharply tailored but slightly too tight suit. He had a severe haircut, a pinched face, and a name tag that read, Bartholomew Finch Lounge Manager. He was flanked by the junior attendant who had been summoned by the woman with the pearls. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, a dry rustling sound. Ma'am, he began, his voice dripping with a cloying, condescending politeness. I am the manager of the Ethelgard Premier Lounge. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. Serafina slowly raised an eyebrow. She held up a single finger, indicating for him to wait, and spoke clearly to her tablet. David, I have a minor disturbance to handle. Finalize the draft and have it in my inbox within the hour. I'll review it before we take off. Talk soon. She ended the call and placed the tablet face down on the table. She then gave Mr. Finch her full, undivided attention. Her expression was unreadable, her posture relaxed but radiating an aura of absolute stillness. You were saying... The woman with the pearls, Penelope Harrington, was now watching with undisguised glee, a smug smirk playing on her lips. She had lit the fuse and was settling in to watch the explosion. The quiet hum of the lounge seemed to dim as a few other patrons began to notice the unfolding drama. For Mr. Finch, this was a moment to assert his authority, to cleanse his pristine sanctuary of an element he had already judged and found wanting. He had no idea he was not stamping out a spark, but striding blithely into the heart of a volcano. Bartholomew Finch prided himself on his discerning eye. He believed he was a guardian of ambiance, a curator of class. In his mind, the Ethelgard Premier Lounge wasn't just a physical space. It was an idea of exclusivity of a certain pedigree. And the woman in front of him with her casual clothes and what he considered a street hairstyle did not fit that idea. The complaint from Mrs. Harrington had been the only excuse he needed. As I was saying, ma'am, he repeated, puffing out his chest slightly. We have a certain code of conduct and an atmosphere to maintain. We've had a complaint from a valued member regarding your presence. He let the word hang in the air, freighted with insinuation. Serafina's gaze didn't waver. She didn't flush with anger or stammer in confusion. Instead, she asked a simple, direct question. A complaint about what specifically? The directness seemed to throw Mr. Finch off his practiced script. Well, he sputtered, the nature of the complaint is a private matter between the club and its members. The issue is one of appropriateness. This is a first-class lounge and certain standards are expected. So, I see, Serafina said, her voice dangerously soft. And you have determined, based on this unspecified complaint and your own personal assessment, that I do not meet these standards. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a confirmation of his prejudice. I am simply trying to do my job, Finch said, his tone hardening. He felt his authority being questioned, and his insecurity curdled into aggression. Frankly, there have been several instances of individuals using fraudulent credentials or Economy Plus upgrades to gain access where they are not permitted. It dilutes the experience for our true first-class passengers. So if you would please show me your boarding pass and lounge invitation, we can clear this up. He said it with an air of finality, as if he expected her to be unable to produce the documents to confess her supposed trespass. Several people were now openly staring. Penelope Harrington leaned forward, and her eyes gleaming. With a sigh that communicated not fear but profound weariness, Serafina reached into her designer belt bag. She bypassed several items and retrieved a simple, crisp document, her boarding pass for Sterling Airlines, Flight 018 to Incheon Seat 1A, first class. She placed it on the table. Finch picked it up, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. He examined it, turning it over as if searching for a watermark or a sign of forgery. This is a valid first-class ticket, he conceded, his voice tight. However, access to the Ethelgard Lounge is not always guaranteed. It depends on fare class and status. My ticket is fare class A, Serafina stated calmly. The highest revenue-generating first-class category, which includes full, unrestricted access to this lounge. I'm sure you know this. Finch was now visibly flustered. His first line of attack had failed. The woman was not an economy passenger who had snuck in. But his pride and the expectant eyes of Mrs. Harrington would not let him back down. He had committed to this path. Be that as it may, he said, his voice rising in volume, drawing more attention. The complaint stands, and management reserves the right to refuse service to anyone. I must insist that you gather your belongings and leave. You are making our other guests uncomfortable." This was the point of no return. He had publicly accused her and was now publicly ejecting her. The humiliation was the entire point. The young attendant, a boy named Leo with wide, frightened eyes, looked from his manager to Serafina, a knot of unease twisting in his stomach. He had taken Mrs. Harrington's initial complaint, and it had been nothing more than a venomous whisper about people like that, lowering the tone. He hadn't expected this. Serafina looked past Finch to Penelope Harrington, who gave a slight triumphant nod. She then looked at the other faces watching her. She saw disdain in some, but in others she saw a flicker of shame, of discomfort at the scene Finch was creating. She folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Finch, let me be very clear," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "You are making a grave error in judgment. I suggest you reconsider your next words very carefully." Her sheer composure was infuriating to him. He mistook her calm for weakness, her warning for an empty threat. "There is nothing to reconsider." He snapped, his voice now loud enough to be heard across the entire lounge. "I am the manager here, and I am telling you to leave. Are you deaf? Get out. If you do not leave immediately, I will be forced to call airport security and have you removed for trespassing." The threat hung in the air, ugly and final. The words airport security and trespassing echoed in the opulent space, a vulgar intrusion into the curated peace. The entire lounge was now silent, all eyes fixed on the confrontation. Serafina was being threatened with forcible removal from a place she was more than entitled to be, all based on the snobbery of one woman and the prejudiced arrogance of one man. She held his gaze for a long moment, a profound silence stretching between them. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was not a smile of amusement, but of grim satisfaction. He had taken every rope she had offered him and braided it into a noose for his own neck. "Very well," Serafina said softly. "You've made your position clear. You've publicly demanded that I leave. You've threatened to involve security." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You've given me no choice." She reached back into her bag. Finch watched a smug look on his face, assuming she was finally packing up to leave. Penelope Harrington sat back in her chair, victorious. But Serafina wasn't pulling out her phone or her wallet. Her fingers closed around something small, hard and heavy. She drew it out and placed it on the mahogany table with a quiet, definitive thud. The sound, though soft, was as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. The object on the table was not a credit card. It was a solid, matte black card, seemingly crafted from a single piece of carbon fiber. It was heavier, thicker than any standard card. Inlaid into its surface was not a printed logo, but a shimmering palladium sigil of a stylized A surrounded by a laurel wreath. Below it, laser-etched in stark white, were two words and a name. Ethelgard Centurion, Dr. Serafina James. There was no number, no expiration date. It wasn't a card for transactions. It was a key, a symbol. In the world of ultra-elite travel, the Ethelgard Centurion Black Card was a myth, a legend. It wasn't something you could apply for. You couldn't earn it with miles or money. You had to be invited. It was reserved for a handful of individuals globally, the founders and majority shareholders of the airlines and hotel conglomerates that formed the Ethelgard Alliance. It granted its holder absolute, unquestionable authority and access to any facility, any service, any aircraft within the entire network. A Centurion holder could bump a paying passenger from a full flight. They could demand a plane be held for them. They were, for all intents and purposes, royalty within this ecosystem. Bartholomew Finch stared at the card. His brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. He had only ever seen a picture of one in a top-level management training manual under a section titled Protocols of Absolute Priority. The manual had been very clear: if a Centurion card is ever presented, the holder's request is to be treated as a direct command from the board of directors. There was no appeal. The blood drained from Finch's face. The ruddy, self-important flush was replaced by a sickly, waxy pallor. His jaw, which had been set in a belligerent line, went slack. A fine sheen of sweat broke out on his forehead. He looked from the impossible card to the calm, implacable face of Dr. Serafina James, the woman in the casual attire, the woman he had just publicly humiliated and threatened to have arrested. That, that can't be real, he whispered the words catching in his dry throat. Serafina didn't reply. She simply tapped a single manicured finger on the card. The silence in the lounge was now thick with a different kind of tension. The glee had evaporated from Penelope Harrington's face, replaced by a dawning horror, as she recognized the shift in power was no mere tremor, but a seismic, landscape-altering earthquake. "You wanted to see my credentials, Mr. Finch." Serafina said, her voice level and cold, each word a perfectly polished stone dropped into a deep well. "There they are. This card is not just an invitation to this lounge. This card signifies that my company, Origen Innovations, is a core strategic partner in the consortium that owns the Ethelgard Alliance. My personal investment and my company's capital are part of the bedrock this very lounge is built upon." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "You spoke of valued members. You spoke of standards. You judged me on my clothes and the color of my skin. You listened to the petty bigotry of that woman." She gestured dismissively toward Mrs. Harrington, who flinched as if struck. "And you used it as a pretext to enforce your own pathetic prejudices." Finch opened his mouth, but only a strangled squeak emerged. He looked desperately around the room as if seeking an exit from the reality he had created. There was none. Every eye was on him, not with contempt for Serafina, but with utter disdain for him. "Let's talk about standards, shall we?" Serafina continued, her voice never rising, yet it filled the entire space. "My standard is developing technology that gives a soldier back the ability to hold his child. My standard is leading a company with 5,000 employees who depend on my judgment. My standard is negotiating billion-dollar deals that shape the future of medicine. What is your standard? Mr. Finch ejecting a black woman from a lounge to feel powerful for 5 minutes?" She stood up slowly, her full height seeming to command the room. She picked up the Centurion card and held it between 2 fingers. "You demanded I leave. You threatened me with security. Now it is my turn to make a demand." She looked straight into his terrified eyes. "I want you to call your superior, your regional director. I don't care who. Get them on the phone, now, and then you will tender your resignation, not tomorrow, not at the end of your shift, right now, in front of everyone you sought to impress." The young attendant Leo was frozen in place, his tray of empty glasses forgotten. He watched mesmerized as the world of his arrogant boss crumbled into dust in a matter of seconds. Penelope Harrington began to quietly gather her things, trying to become invisible, to slink away before the fallout reached her. "Oh no," Serafina said, her gaze snapping to the woman. "You're not going anywhere. You are the valued member who made the complaint. You are a witness to this. You will stay and watch." Penelope froze, her hand hovering over her Vuitton bag, her face a mask of pure panic. The hunter had become the hunted. Mr. Finch, trembling, fumbled for his phone. His fingers, slick with sweat, could barely operate the touchscreen. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic, pathetic tapping of a man dialing the number that would end his career. The show he had initiated was about to reach its spectacular, ruinous climax. The act of making the phone call was for Bartholomew Finch a journey into surreal horror. His hand, which had gestured with such imperious authority only minutes before, now trembled so violently he could barely unlock his smartphone screen. Each failed biometric scan was a fresh wave of humiliation. The hushed lounge once his kingdom had transformed into a courtroom, and every patron was a juror who had already reached a verdict. He could feel their eyes on him, a collective weight of scorn and morbid curiosity. Finally, he managed to tap out the direct number for Catherine Sterling, the Vice President of Customer Experience. The number was a privilege, a direct line to power he had been so proud of, and now it was the instrument of his own execution. Serafina had insisted he use the speakerphone. It was not a request. He placed the phone on the polished mahogany table next to the terrifying black Centurion card that had started it all. The dialing tone echoed in the cavernous silence, each electronic beep sounding like a hammer striking the nail of his professional coffin. After 3 rings, the call connected. "Finch, this had better be important." Catherine Sterling's voice crackled through the small speaker. It was a voice accustomed to efficiency, a voice that suffered neither fools nor delays. "I'm in the middle of a Q3 budget review, and I don't have time for trivialities." Finch swallowed his throat, feeling as though it were lined with sandpaper. Ms. Sterling, Catherine, it's Bartholomew Finch at JFK Terminal 4. He began, his voice a reedy, unfamiliar thing. We have a situation here, in the Ethelgard Premier Lounge. A situation, she repeated, the word dripping with disdain. What kind of situation, Bartholomew? Did the plumbing back up into the champagne cooler? Did a celebrity have a meltdown? Spit it out. He glanced at Dr. Seraphina James, who stood observing him with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a specimen. Her calm was a stark, terrifying contrast to his own spiraling panic. It's a guest, Ms. Sterling. A passenger. There was a complaint lodged by another member. A complaint and I took action, he stammered, trying to frame his colossal error in the language of proactive management. I addressed the passenger. I felt her presence was not in keeping with our standards of decorum, and I suspected her credentials might be, well, fraudulent. There was a pause. When Catherine spoke again, her voice had sharpened to a razor's edge. You suspected fraud from a first-class passenger in my flagship lounge, and you chose to confront them publicly. This passenger, I presume, was not in fact a fraud. No, Miss Sterling, he whispered. Her credentials, they are valid. Who is the passenger, Bartholomew? Catherine's voice was now dangerously low, all impatience replaced by a focused intensity. Give me the name, now. Finch's eyes darted to the name etched in stark white on the carbon fiber card. He felt a wave of dizziness. This was the point of no return. The passenger's name, he said, the words barely audible, is Dr. Seraphina James. On the other end of the line, in a sterile high-rise office in Chicago, Catherine Sterling went utterly still. The name didn't just ring a bell, it detonated a siren in her mind. Dr. Seraphina James, Origin Innovations. Her eyes shot to a thick-bound portfolio on her desk, labeled with a single highly confidential code name, Project Nightingale. Project Nightingale was the internal designation for the Trans Global Holdings deal with Origin. It was the moonshot, the single biggest strategic initiative in the parent company's history. Just last week, the CEO of Trans Global himself, Charles Davenport, had held a video conference with his top executives. His face, usually jovial, had been grimly serious. Nightingale isn't just a deal, he had warned them. It's our future. It's a $30 billion partnership that will secure our position as the world's premier logistics firm for the next quarter century. The CEO, Dr. James, is the heart and soul of it. She is brilliant, she is principled, and she does not suffer fools. Every single touch point she has with our brand must be flawless. Is that understood? A cold dread, so intense it was almost nauseating, washed over Catherine. She realized Bartholomew Finch, in his petty fiefdom at JFK, had not just mistreated a VIP. He had taken a lit torch to Project Nightingale. The silence on the line stretched for an agonizing 10 seconds. The patrons in the lounge exchanged uneasy glances. They sensed the shift. This was no longer just a manager being reprimanded. When Catherine Sterling finally spoke, her voice was unrecognizable. It had been stripped of all emotion, save for a glacial, terrifying rage that promised devastation. Bartholomew, she began, her enunciation so precise it was like chips of ice. You breathtaking, cosmically stupid man. I want you to listen to me. I want you to truly comprehend the magnitude of what you have just done. Finch flinched as if he'd been physically struck. Do you have any idea who Dr. Seraphina James is? Catherine continued, her voice a low, venomous hiss that the speakerphone rendered with tinny brutality. Forget the Centurion card. That card is a footnote. Dr. Seraphina James is the founder, CEO, and chief architect of Origin Innovations. For the past 6 months, my boss and my boss's boss, Charles Davenport himself, has been personally courting Dr. James to make Sterling Airlines and our parent company the exclusive global logistics partner for her technology. She paused, letting the weight of the CEO's name hang in the air. It's a contract valued at over $30 billion. Billion, Bartholomew, with a B. It involves retrofitting our cargo fleet to transport her priceless medical components. It's the deal our entire 5-year strategic plan is built around. And you, in your infinite wisdom, because you didn't like her sneakers, decided to treat her like a vagrant. You have not just insulted a passenger, you have taken a wrecking ball to the pillars of this entire corporation. Around the lounge, jaws were literally agape. A man in a Savile Row suit who had been watching with detached amusement now looked pale. He recognized the name Origin from the financial pages. Penelope Harrington, the instigator, seemed to have shrunk into her chair, her face the color of spoiled milk. The full, horrifying scope of what she had set in motion was crashing down upon her. This was no longer her victory. She was collateral damage in a corporate cataclysm. "I need to speak with Dr. James, now," Catherine commanded. "Put her on the phone before you cause this company to hemorrhage any more shareholder value." Finch, looking utterly broken, picked up the phone with a trembling hand and extended it towards Serafina as if it were a bomb. Serafina took the phone, her movements calm and deliberate. "This is Dr. James." "Dr. James?" Catherine's voice was instantly transformed, now filled with a desperate, profound deference. "My name is Catherine Sterling. There are no words. The English language is insufficient to express the depth of my apology. What you have experienced is a sickening, inexcusable failure on every conceivable level. It is an indictment of our training, our culture, and of the man whose employment with us has already ceased. I assure you, we will—" "Ms. Sterling," Serafina cut in, her voice polite but firm, stopping the torrent of apologies. "I appreciate the sentiment, but let's be clear. Mr. Finch is not the problem. He is a symptom. The problem is a corporate culture that allowed him to believe his actions were acceptable. The problem is an environment where a woman," she glanced pointedly at Penelope Harrington, "can use her privilege as a weapon, and your staff will validate her bigotry without a second thought." She began to pace slowly, the phone held to her ear. "This isn't about my hurt feelings, Miss Sterling. This is about the integrity of a brand that wishes to do business with me. Origen's mission is to restore human dignity. We cannot, in good conscience, partner with a company whose representatives so casually strip people of theirs. An apology is a start, but it is only that. What I require is action. What I require is systemic change." "Anything," Catherine breathed. "Tell me what you need." "My team will be in contact with your legal department by morning," Serafina stated. "They will outline a series of non-negotiable conditions for our partnership to even be considered. This will include a mandatory company-wide bias and sensitivity training program from the boardroom to the baggage handlers. This program will be designed by a top-tier consultancy firm of my choosing and paid for by your company. Furthermore, you will issue a public statement acknowledging this incident, without naming me, of course, and detailing the concrete steps you are taking to ensure it is never repeated. My business is built on trust. Your organization today has broken that trust. These are the first steps to rebuilding it." "Consider it done, Dr. James," Catherine said, the relief in her voice palpable. It was a steep price, but it was infinitely better than losing the deal entirely. "We will do whatever it takes." "I'm glad to hear it," Serafina said coolly. "Now I believe your former manager has a duty to perform." She ended the call and handed the phone back to the hollowed-out shell of a man who was Bartholomew Finch. The device felt impossibly heavy in his hand. He looked at the silent faces at the woman who had so thoroughly and quietly dismantled his entire world. The unraveling was over. All that was left was for him to speak his own professional eulogy. The silence that followed Serafina handing the phone back to Bartholomew Finch was the most profound he had ever experienced. It was a heavy, suffocating void filled only by the frantic thumping of his own heart. The phone felt like a dead weight in his palm. He looked at the faces around him, the steely, unimpressed gaze of Dr. Serafina James, the wide, pitying eyes of his junior staff, the shocked, judgmental stares of the patrons he had tried so hard to impress. His entire world had been a stage, and he had just spectacularly failed his one and only line. "Mr. Finch," the new acting manager, a woman named Diane, who had been his subordinate just an hour ago, said quietly. Her tone was not unkind, but it was firm. It was the tone of someone cleaning up a mess. "It's time." He nodded numbly. Clearing his throat, which felt raw and constricted, he spoke to the room, his voice a hollow echo of its former pomposity. "By the authority of Sterling Airlines Management, I hereby tender my resignation." effective immediately. He couldn't bring himself to look at anyone. Staring at his own reflection in the polished surface of a nearby table, he was met with the image of a stranger, a pale, defeated man, whose expensive suit now seemed like a cheap costume. His walk out of the Ethelgard Premier Lounge was a blur of shame. No one met his eye. They looked away, studying their phones or the ceiling, granting him the small mercy of ignoring his utter humiliation. He was no longer the manager, the authority, the guardian of standards. He was just a man who had to push through the glass doors into the noisy common chaos of the terminal his kingdom lost forever. He found a hard plastic seat in the main concourse, wedged between a crying baby and a group of teenagers watching videos on a phone. The harsh fluorescent lights and cacophony of public announcements were a brutal assault after the serene luxury he had just left. It was here, amidst the common humanity he so disdained, that he made his final desperate move. He scrolled through his contacts to the name that had been his shield and his secret weapon, his entire adult life, Uncle Alistair. Meanwhile, on his secluded estate in the Scottish Highlands, Alistair Finch poured himself a glass of single malt whiskey. His hand, usually steady, trembled slightly. He had just concluded a call with a very agitated Charles Davenport, CEO of Transglobal Holdings. The call had been a deeply unpleasant mixture of profuse apologies from Davenport and strained reassurances from Alistair. It had been embarrassing. Alistair had built his global reputation on flawless execution and unimpeachable integrity. His own nephew, a boy he had given a chance to prove himself, had just used the family name as a cudgel for cheap, ugly prejudice, nearly blowing up a deal that would define the industry for a generation. When his phone rang again and he saw Bartholomew's name, his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Uncle Alistair!" Bartholomew's voice was thick with a pathetic, wheedling tone. "Thank God. Something terrible has happened. That woman, she twisted everything. They fired me. It was a complete misunderstanding, a setup." "Silence!" Alistair's voice boomed, cutting through the self-pity. There was no warmth, no avuncular kindness. Only the Arctic chill of profound disappointment. "I have just spent 20 minutes on the telephone with Charles Davenport. He, in turn, had to spend 30 minutes groveling to a woman I consider to be one of the finest minds of her generation. Do not speak to me of misunderstandings, Bartholomew. Speak to me of your catastrophic arrogance." "But, Uncle, you don't understand. I understand perfectly," Alistair interjected, his voice laced with contempt. "I understand that I have known Dr. Serafina James since she was a brilliant, driven doctoral candidate at MIT whose research into neural pathways I personally helped fund. I understand that the Centurion card she carries was not a corporate perk. It was a personal gift from myself and the other founding members of the Alliance, a symbol of our respect for a true Titan. She is more of an heir to the philosophy I built my business on than you, my own blood, could ever hope to be. You didn't just insult a passenger, you fool. You took a torch to my legacy." Bartholomew was speechless, the blood draining from his face. "You know her. Personally. You have coasted on my name your entire life." Alistair continued, his voice relentless. "You enjoyed the privilege but never understood the responsibility. You thought the lounge was about keeping people out. I built it to be a sanctuary for people who are changing the world, people like her. You are a disgrace. The lawyers will be in contact with you in the morning. Your access to the family trust is terminated. Your mentions in my will are being redacted. The name you carry is now nothing more than a historical coincidence. You are on your own. Do not ever call this number again." The click of the disconnected line was the loudest sound Bartholomew had ever heard. It was the sound of his entire world vanishing. Thousands of feet over the Atlantic, the cabin of Serafina's first-class suite was an oasis of calm. But she wasn't resting. Her tablet was propped up, displaying a secure video call with two of her most trusted executives, Jessica Morales, her razor-sharp head of PR, and Marcus Thorne, her stoic and unflappable chief counsel. "The situation is contained for now," Jessica was saying. "Sterling's PR team is in full panic mode. They'll agree to anything. But we need to address the other loose end, the catalyst. Penelope Harrington." Serafina said, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "What have we got, Jessica?" "Married to Robert Harrington," Jessica said, reading from her screen. "He's the owner and CEO of a mid-tier supplier, Harrington Precision Components, based in Dayton, Ohio. They specialize in... She paused, her eyes widening slightly. Well, what do you know? They specialize in high-tolerance metallic casings for servo mechanisms. Serafina's eyebrow arched. That sounds familiar. It should, Marcus Thorne cut in, his voice a low baritone. I've just cross-referenced our procurement database. Harrington Precision Components is the sole supplier for the articulating joint casings in our Aura 7 prosthetic arm. They have a $3 million annual contract with us. It's up for renewal in 30 days. A heavy silence filled the virtual meeting. Serafina stared out the window at the endless blue horizon. The irony was staggering. The woman whose petty bigotry had led to this ugly affair was directly profiting from the very technology Serafina had dedicated her life to creating, technology that served to empower and uplift. Marcus Ray, Serafina asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Remind me of the wording in Clause 12B of our standard supplier agreement. Marcus didn't need to look it up. Partners and their primary associates shall conduct themselves in a manner that does not bring disrepute, scandal, or public contempt upon the Auragen brand, he recited. A violation of this clause, which includes but is not limited to acts of public intolerance or ethical malfeasance, is grounds for immediate contract termination. The public humiliation of our CEO, instigated by the wife of a partner's CEO, seems to fall squarely into that category, Jessica noted dryly. Serafina made her decision. It was swift and absolute. This isn't about revenge, she stated, her gaze resolute. This is about brand integrity. We cannot have the family that profits from our mission be the same one that publicly attacks its values. The conflict is untenable. Marcus, draft the termination letter. Cite Clause 12B. Make it effective immediately. Jessica, task your team with sourcing a replacement. I want a list of minority or women-owned engineering firms on my desk by the time we land in Seoul. We will pay a premium to expedite the transition. In an office in Dayton, Ohio, Robert Harrington's fate and that of his company and his smug wife was being sealed in a single cold, legally airtight email. But Serafina's final act before the 777's doors had closed was one of construction, not destruction. As the chaos in the lounge swirled, she had sought out the young, terrified attendant, Leo Kowalski. He was nervously collecting discarded glasses, trying to make himself invisible. Leo, she said kindly. He froze, looking up at her as if she were an apparition. Dr. James, he stammered. I am so sorry for... You have nothing to be sorry for, she interrupted gently. I was watching you. I saw the conflict in your eyes. You knew what was happening was wrong. Tell me, what are you studying? Business administration, ma'am. At Baruch College, I take night classes. And you work here to pay for it? He nodded, embarrassed. Yes, ma'am. That's called grit, Leo. That's more valuable than any inheritance. She pulled out a sleek, minimalist business card from her bag. My company has a foundation. It provides scholarships for students with grit. And my company's headquarters in New York has a rather large business administration department that values people with a strong moral compass. She pressed the card into his hand. Send me your resume and speak to your acting manager. I've left instructions for you to receive a bonus from my personal account for your discretion and for holding on to your decency when it would have been easier not to. Leo stared at the card in his hand, then at the brilliant, powerful woman smiling at him. In the span of an hour, his world had been turned upside down. He had watched a man's empire crumble, and now in the wreckage he was being handed the blueprint to build his own. 3 months can feel like a lifetime. In the corporate ecosystem of Sterling Airlines and its parent TransGlobal Holdings, it was a period of seismic cultural shifting. The JFK Ethelgard incident had become a legendary cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and boardrooms alike. But Serafina James had ensured it would be more than just a story. It would be a lesson etched into the very DNA of the company. The first ripples of change were felt in sterile training rooms across the country. Serafina's chosen consultancy, the formidable Covington Group, descended upon the airline with a mandate for total reform. In a conference room in Dallas, a skeptical veteran pilot sat with his arms crossed as the trainer, a sharp woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, put up a slide. Implicit bias. It read, is not about being a bad person, it's about having a human brain. She guided them through scenarios some uncomfortably close to the Finch incident, demonstrating how subtle, unexamined prejudices about attire, race, or age could lead to catastrophic service failures. For the first time, employees were not just being told what to do, but were being taught to understand why they might make a mistake. The centerpiece of the reform was the James Protocols. It was a multifaceted system. A new app was deployed on all employee devices, allowing for the instant anonymous reporting of prejudiced behavior from colleagues or customers, with reports going directly to a newly formed independent ethics committee. Furthermore, any attempt to deny service or remove a passenger from a premium space now required a second key authorization from a senior manager who had passed an advanced Covington Group certification, a manager like Diane who had replaced Finch at JFK. The power of a single biased individual to act unilaterally was surgically removed. This quiet internal revolution culminated in a very loud public announcement. The setting was the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, a temple of capital where perception is reality. Before a throng of financial journalists and a battery of cameras, Charles Davenport, the CEO of TransGlobal, stood at a podium flanked by Serafina James and a visibly humbled Catherine Sterling. The logos of TransGlobal and Origin Innovations shimmered on the massive screens behind them. Davenport, a man known for his booming confidence, spoke with uncharacteristic humility. For generations, the aviation industry has focused on engineering, on speed, on luxury, he began. We measured success in metrics of efficiency and profit, but we learned through a recent and deeply regrettable failure that we were overlooking the most critical metric of all: dignity. He went on to detail the new partnership with Origin not just as a financial boon, but as a moral and operational realignment. He publicly lauded Dr. James not just as a business partner, but as a vital catalyst who held up a mirror and challenged us to be better. Then Serafina stepped to the microphone. A hush fell over the normally chaotic trading floor. She wore a simple but elegant dress, the picture of grace and power. "Adversity is inevitable," she said, her voice calm and clear. "It is how we respond to it that defines us. An organization, like a person, can choose to be broken by its mistakes, or it can choose to build upon them. Today, TransGlobal has chosen to build. This partnership is founded on more than contracts and capital. It is founded on a renewed commitment to a simple, powerful idea that every single person has value. My life's work at Origin is to restore what has been lost. It is my sincere belief that our new partners now share a deeper understanding of that mission. The future we build together will not only be more profitable, but more decent. And that is a standard worth celebrating." It was a masterclass in turning a crisis into a triumph. The headlines the next day were not about an airline's embarrassing scandal, but about a visionary partnership and a new benchmark for corporate responsibility. Far from the flashbulbs of New York, the consequences of that day at JFK continued to cascade. In a heavily mortgaged house in a Dayton suburb, Penelope Harrington scrolled through a financial news site on her laptop. She saw a picture of Serafina James ringing the opening bell at the NYSE. Her husband Robert's company had filed for bankruptcy a month prior. The abrupt cancellation of the Origin contract had been a fatal blow, leading to a chain reaction of defaults. Their assets were frozen, their social circle had evaporated, and their marriage had crumbled under the weight of his furious, endless refrain. "What were you thinking?" Penelope stared at Serafina's smiling, confident face on the screen, her own heart a cold, heavy stone of bitter regret. Her desire to feel superior for a fleeting moment had cost her everything. Weeks later, Serafina found herself in the Ethelgard Premier Lounge at London Heathrow. The atmosphere was palpably different from the one she had experienced at JFK months earlier. The staff were attentive but relaxed, their smiles genuine. The hushed tones felt respectful, not exclusionary. As she worked, a smartly dressed young man in a manager's uniform approached her table with a confident stride. "Dr. James," he asked, a bright, familiar smile on his face. "I don't know if you remember me. It's Leo Kowalski." Serafina's face broke into a warm, delighted grin. She stood to shake his hand. "Leo? Of course I remember. Congratulations on the new uniform. It suits you." "I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice brimming with sincere emotion. "Your foundation's scholarship is covering my final year. I'll graduate debt-free. And this management program, it's incredible. They flew me to London for advanced training." He leaned in a little, his expression earnest. "And the protocols, they actually work. Last week, a passenger complained about a family with young children being in the quiet zone. Old me would have been terrified. New me just followed the protocol, explained our family-inclusive policy, and politely declined his request to move them. My senior manager backed me up without hesitation. What you did, it empowered all of us." "That's the best news I've heard all day, Leo," Serafina said. "Remember, a title doesn't give you authority. Your character does. Keep leading with that, and you'll go far." Their moment of shared success was a universe away from the story's final chapter, which was unfolding in the bleak darkness off a Delaware highway. At 3:00 a.m., the Starlight Motor Inn was a lonely outpost of flickering neon. Behind the counter, Bartholomew Finch, clad in a cheap polyester uniform stained with coffee, was listlessly wiping down the Formica. His life was a monotonous cycle of checking in tired truckers and dealing with clogged toilets. His inheritance was gone, his name was worthless, and his resume was poison. A small television mounted in the corner of the lobby was playing a rebroadcast of a news magazine. Suddenly, he heard a familiar name. He looked up. The screen was filled with the face of Dr. Serafina James. The segment was about her foundation's work. It showed her meeting with the veteran sergeant who had lost his arm, the man who could now tie his daughter's shoelaces with his Origen prosthetic. The sergeant was weeping with joy. His daughter was hugging him. Finch stood frozen, the dirty rag dropping from his hand. He stared at the screen, at the pure, unassailable good this woman was putting into the world. He saw the lives she was changing, the hope she was creating, and in that moment the full crushing weight of his actions fell upon him. His karma wasn't just his fall from grace, the loss of his job, or his uncle's fortune. It was the devastating, undeniable clarity of what he had done. He hadn't confronted a trespasser. He hadn't upheld a standard. He had tried out of sheer pathetic arrogance to diminish a giant, and all he had managed to do was erase himself. And that's how a single moment of prejudice led to a complete corporate and personal reckoning. Dr. Serafina James reminds us that true power isn't just about wealth or status. It's about having the strength of character to use your influence for positive change. She didn't just win, she rewrote the rules for everyone. What did you think of the way karma was served? Was it too harsh, or was it perfectly fitting for the offense? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. These stories of justice are important, and sharing them helps spread the message. If you were moved or inspired by this story, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of drama twists and ultimate karma. Thanks for listening.